Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English. Okay, ready to go?
Yeah, ready.
Ready.
Go. Let's go.
All right, we're going to do it. Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I'm here with Priscilla. Welcome.
Hello.
Let me give you a formal introduction so everyone knows who you are, and then we can get into the topics that we've chosen for today. So, Priscila Bordon.
Yes, Bordon.
I mean, Portuguese accent's getting good. Has been an English teacher for over 10 years in both public and private sectors, with experience from kindergarten to teaching in universities abroad. She holds a Master's of Arts in Global Englishes from the University of Southampton. She's a Chevening and Fulbright alumna, both which allowed her to research and teach. She's a teacher trainer, and materials writer, and English as a lingua franca consultant for ELT publishing houses.
Yeah, that's me.
She's our elf lady.
Well, this can mean so many things. But I have a friend, Taylor, that she calls me Elf Queen, Elf something, Elf Babe, Elf whatever.
Yes.
So I'm the
Elf.
elf. And
the elf lady, the elf queen, the elf babe. Yeah, we'll just boss
complete.
lady.
Elf and complete with whatever you want.
Woo! Okay, so elf, we'll just break it down for anybody that doesn't know, is English as a lingua franca. Yes, that has been kind of your area, your focus, your specialization. Why elf?
Actually, I've before I did my experience, I had my experiences abroad. My first one was in the US, and before that, and even during this period, I had no idea there was such a thing called English as a lingua franca. Like in 2015, 16, had no idea. But then I was lucky enough to go teach Portuguese in HBCU, historically black college. And because of Ebonics and the variation in English in the USA, I got interested in learning about these variations. This is very far from English as a lingua franca, but that's where it started. It's because of Ebonics.
That's where you started having lots of questions.
Because it has nothing to do with English as a lingua franca. Well, there's a little to do, but it's not. They are not related in research areas. Like we don't study Ebonics in English as a lingua franca, but because of.
But it's a different English, right? It's like a different area of study, and so you're like, oh.
Yeah, because I thought I knew English before I went there, and then I had like
welcome.
I had to study, and then one thing I heard during this time made me very eager to go study these variations. So I had a professor, and I was the only non-black student, because I don't consider myself white, like in the US, not Latina. So I was non-black, because all my other friends in this class, they were all black students from the US. And then this professor was white. And in the end of the lesson, he said, "Wow, you speak English so well. You speak English much better than all of the other students. They don't make an effort to speak proper English." And because of this sentence, and then I at first, it sounds like a compliment if you're a non-native speaker. But then I look at my friends, and I look at the teacher, and I look where I am. And then like I got very curious to know why he was saying that. Like, did he expect less from me, or is it racism? Is it like, what is that? Because it was a very strange comment to do.
It kind of just came out of left field. You're like, what? Okay.
Well,
thank you, and moving on.
Yeah, because he meant as a compliment.
Uh-huh.
But at that moment in that school with those students, me not being a non-native, like there are so many layers in
Yeah.
this situation. And a very simple comment, like it was a sentence one day, it made me go research more about like variation in English and um, beliefs and like all of that. And I stumbled, like I just I found English as a lingua franca like someday there, boom, appeared in my screen.
Was it like, oh, and Jennifer Jenkins magically appears?
Yes, something like that. Exactly.
Like a unicorn popping out from YouTube or
I
something.
swear to God, it was some, and it's funny because like movie moment when there's this light bulb above your head and it lights up. That was what happened to me. I saw English as a lingua franca and I started reading. And then I saw an article by Jennifer Jenkins about like English as a lingua franca and attitudes, like how different variations are labeled with some adjectives. And then, boom, my head just exploded. And then that's when I came back to Brazil and I wanted to do a master's. Um, and then I wanted to do a master's related to that, to English as a lingua franca. And I didn't really like knew how to explain or how to use the right names to describe it. But I knew I wanted to do that. And then I emailed Jennifer Jenkins, just like,
Bold. Like,
I'll just
hey.
email her. And after her response, like her reply to me was very, how can I say, welcoming. Like she was welcoming me to like this elf world. And then I decided to try a scholarship to study my master's with her in Southampton. And then it worked out, and I went to Southampton to study global Englishes in the same department Jennifer Jenkins was, and then well, and then I'm here.
And then
Yeah, and
now
then
you're the elf queen.
as Taylor says, she says I'm the elf queen. I accept the title, but I don't think I am. That's Jennifer Jenkins, the elf queen. But
I mean, we can dispute the hierarchy of it later, but
but I think that was it. Like my interest started with an example of racism at first, and that made me very, very uncomfortable and made me like go research and understand like why is this professor telling me I speak English better than my colleagues, my friends, my classmates studying with me that are native speakers of English, but they are black, and I'm a non-native speaker, and I'm not black. So these situations, this course made me very uncomfortable and made me research about what is going on, and I found English as a lingua franca as an answer.
great. Okay. So then we came up with three misconceptions, should we call them? Misconceptions, lies, not lies necessarily. I don't think anybody states these as
I,
truths, but
yeah, I would say
misunderstanding. Yeah.
misunderstandings. Yeah.
Uh-huh. About elf. So the first one, we're going to just try and break it down for everybody. Elf is just a simpler version of English.
Mhm.
Okay, so why do people think that? Why do they think it's like a simpler version?
Yeah, because I think people, when they hear about English as a lingua franca, they think, well, it's something related to like communicating because they all connect the communication thing with the lingua franca part of English as a lingua franca. Because we kind of learn in letras courses that Latin was the first lingua franca. So we kind of learned this when we are starting to study to be a teacher here in Brazil usually. So we link this idea of like lingua franca with communication with different cultures. The thing is, when we talk about English, usually some people feel very protective of it So sometimes the idea that we only use a language for communication, sometimes it leads them to believe that you're just going to use whatever you know, whatever you can to communicate, and sometimes it's wrong, so it doesn't matter. So it's just a simpler way to speak. You're not using the proper way to speak. So, and also because of this idea of communication between cultures, etc., etc., there was this French guy in the 90s or the 80s, I don't remember exactly when, but there was this French guy that created something called Globish. That is
Oh,
indeed
isn't it like a created thing where they tried to like, okay, you can explain
simplify,
it, but
to
yeah.
simplify English, yes.
Yes,
And
yes.
it was like everybody talking like cavemen. It was really weird because it's just like he tried to um I can't really explain, but he tried to take out from sentences the prepositions, and then you just throw some words, and there was this
It's like the
dictionary.
non 100% necessary components that it was like reducing things down, distilling them down to so that it was the most basic components to communicate a message, kind of. That, I mean,
Exactly.
kind of what he was trying to do, right?
Yes. So, and there
It
was
didn't
this,
work.
no,
Obviously, it didn't work.
no, but there was this dictionary of Globish, and you could only use those words in this dictionary. And there was the rules like you shouldn't need, you don't need to use certain words because they were too complicated. So it was indeed a simplified version of English, and some people link English as a lingua franca to that as well. So they just connect these random ideas like communication and this globish thing that appeared on TV, and then English is a lingua franca. They connect all these things and they think English is a lingua franca is just, let's just simplify English and just communicate, as if communication is something not important enough. Like speaking properly is like hierarchically falando. Sorry, I'm mixing Portuguese and English.
It's
Hierarchically
fine.
speaking,
Uh,
um, communicating is less than speaking properly. It's like
but
enough.
yeah, so so then, okay, that's the misconception. So then how would we clearly define it so that people can kind of understand it? Because it's not really a simplification. And I think also what contributes to that is the name. Yeah, the Globish, and then lingua franca, and then communication, this whole idea of like communicative approach. I've even seen that mixed in with it. And then also, and I'm not trying to criticize or anything, but there's also, and these have been oversimplified very much so, and highlighted in a way that hasn't been clear enough for teachers, that Jennifer Jenkins has put priorities, right? So there's like the list of 5 or whatever, and it's like the top 5 it's not
Exactly. Mm-mm.
saying that everything else, you don't teach everything else, but it's like these are the top priorities for effective communication, and everything else maybe should be included, but it's not, right? So they say, okay,
Yeah,
well, if you're teaching English as a lingua franca, then you only have to teach this, and it's like a list, and it's like,
yeah.
no, not necessarily,
That's
right?
yeah. That's the, I think, the biggest misconception, because actually this is part. Jennifer Jenkins, after some time, she divided ELF in like 3 stages. Not that they like, we don't have anything related to stage 1 anymore, so we just like forget about it and then we just do stage 3, not in this sense, but she has divided the research in 3 parts. And this list of priorities in teaching pronunciation, considering the lingua franca core, la la la, this is from stage 1, when she started researching English as a lingua franca, when it was very something new.
It was like in its infancy, and so she was trying to like break it down into
Yeah.
like digestible pieces. But what happened is people ran with the idea of the lingua franca chord. That's it.
Yeah, and no, actually, she kind of regrets it. She has already mentioned that many times because in the middle of stage three, around 2008, 2009, all researchers in English, all, not all, I can say all, but most of them realized that English as a lingua franca research could not try to find a way to describe English as a lingua franca as a variety or as a new language or something like that. So they realized it was a phenomenon that you had to study in social linguistics as a phenomenon in different contexts, in different communicative, no, community of practices, in different community of practices, and in different situations. So in each situation, you study the language and the communication in each context of English as a lingua franca use, you'll find an example of the use of English. So you could not teach English as a lingua franca as in stage one because after that they realized English as a lingua franca was not that. You could not describe it as a variety. So you could not teach it.
Yeah, it was not something that they could just like I don't know if I can say it, like mass produce materials for like this is what right it
Yeah, you could
wasn't
not do that. Yeah.
right. It's
So
not
that
applicable in all can't say it's not it's applicable in all scenarios, but not the same in all.
yeah, because actually English as a lingua franca is a phenomenon. It like
Mhm.
you observe it, you see it, the use of English in lingua franca contexts. So I think it's the best definition I can give is that English is English, English, the language. But we when we talk about English as a lingua franca, we are talking about the use of English in intercultural communication. That is, when people communicate and they have different first languages. So, for example, we have different first languages. This is intercultural communication, and we could say this is a lingua franca context. So, we are using English as a lingua franca. That's
Welcome.
it.
Welcome to our context.
So that's it. That's the
That makes sense.
definition of
Yeah.
English as a lingua franca. Some people debate if native speakers can be considered English as a lingua franca users, but some people debate that. But in my opinion, I think they are. They could be.
Well, I mean,
They not that they are, but they could be. For example, in your
mm,
case, in that you
mhm.
have how can I say openness to different accents, like you can accommodate to different accents of English, like you make an effort to understand different accents because you are an English teacher in Brazil, so you are familiar with different accents and all. You are an English as a lingua franca user because you are so immersed in a different culture that uses English for communication, and we don't have English as a first language, that you are an ELF user. But let's imagine, um, like in Southampton, the bus driver, I used to see him every day, and he had he couldn't understand what I was saying. That's it. I would say like, "Oh, how are you? How's your day?" Blah 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 blah, something like that, and he couldn't understand what I was saying, and he didn't make an effort.
Um,
So this guy, this bus driver in Southampton, he's not an ALF user because he's not.
does it depend on the effort in trying to reach an end goal? Is that like a component of it as
Yeah,
well?
I'm
Not
saying the
only
word. not
Mm,
I'm using the
mm.
word effort, but that's not it. It's like using different communication strategies to engage in communication. So, for example, accommodation, when we accommodate, is like when you make this effort to communicate, to try to find the right words to communicate and engage with another person. This is a communication strategy. So, if you use these communication strategies to try to communicate, this is like making an effort. But some people don't want to
Some
make
people
it.
don't.
Yeah.
Some people don't.
So
Like I don't, but it's not necessarily their fault. And I think that sometimes it's just that they don't really want to engage in it, or it's not necessarily interesting for them as personally,
yeah, no, it's
which
like
is fine. But it's defining the scenarios and the context in which, and the behaviors maybe, and the performance of the people that are engaging in communication that would define that as an elf user or elf scenario or
yeah.
not.
That's why in stage two of research and elf research, one of the hot topics was like attitudes, beliefs, perceptions. So one of the main books Jennifer Jenkins wrote is called, where is it? English as a Lingua Franca, and what's the name? Attitude and identity. Because then we start talking, when we are talking about English as a lingua franca and attitudes, we are also discussing identities, how people identify with the English they speak and the English they interact with. So sometimes I'll give a very simple example. My husband, he grew up loving Brit rock and Brit pop. He loves it, like Oasis, Blur, and all these Britpop bands. And when he started learning English, even though he's never been to Britain, Great Britain, England, whatever, he was in Pindamonhangaba speaking with a British accent, like trying to do a
I
British
love
accent.
it.
Yeah, trying to, because it's not. But he
Yeah.
was trying to do a British accent. And not because I want to sound like a British person. No, it's because he identified with a certain type of music, and the singers in the music he sang all the time, he spoke that English. So that was the only thing he was consuming all the time, and it was in English. So for him, English was that. So it's related to his identity and his like, because he liked music so much and those bands so much, that was connected to his identity as well. So that's how, like,
Does he still speak with a British accent?
yes. Because he
She
can't.
says regrettably.
Yeah, but he can't change it. I like, he kind of tries, but he can't.
It's so funny. No, actually, I don't know if you saw it last year. I was talking to Victor Medina, the pronunciation, yeah.
Mhm.
And he had a kind of a similar experience where he was, I believe he's from somewhere in Minas, and he was speaking with a British accent because it was just something that he had picked up, and that's how he spoke. And he spent a lot of time in the UK, and he made I remember him telling me that he made a very conscious decision of the variation of the accent that he chose, because it felt more comfortable, the way that he was saying. And his friends that are from the UK were like, well, why are you saying it? Why do you have this variation of this accent from like a very specific region there? He goes, it just feels more comfortable saying it that way than the Londoner accent, for example. So it just kind of, he identified with it more, and it felt better saying it in a specific way.
Yeah,
So
so that's it. And it's like another anecdote. I'm just like telling stories here. But when I was in my master's, it was me and 20 Chinese students. So all these Chinese students, they believed from the bottom of their hearts that I was a native speaker. And they used to like to say as a compliment, but because we were discussing global Englishes and English as a lingua franca in class. And they would tell me like, you are a native speaker, you don't have a problem, you don't know how it feels to go to the supermarket, and when you forget to say please, people ignore you. And I was like, they think I am a native speaker just because I'm not Chinese, and because I have my accent the way it is, and they have a very like Chinese, uh, Chinese English, because there is like, I learned in Southampton that there is a Chinese English, and they have a very Chinese English accent. So it's identity plays a big part in English as a lingua franca. Like attitudes and um, identity. So if you try to discuss accents, we are always going to find attitudes. That's why am I saying that?
Why do we? No, we were talking of, okay, simplifying it, and then we started talking. The next one I think we already kind of jumped into is ELF is just speaking the way that you want to speak, and it's not necessarily that. But the accent and the identity thing makes a lot of sense because, well, I come from the Northeast. My father is from Texas. Well, he's from Texas, but he grew up in Southern California. My mom grew up in Miami, so I have kind of varying. And then my some of my younger cousins are like born and raised like in the Boston area with the strong Boston accents, and then I have cousins in rural areas of Oklahoma and Texas that have the very, very strong Southern accents. And it's interesting because we do identity does play a huge role in how you want to be represented, similar to what you were saying about your husband. He identified with a period of time, musicians and specific genre of music in a period of time, and that's how he kind of
He
identifies himself.
performed his identity this way in English. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's my cousins that from the South, very, very proud Southerners, and they would never dilute or remove their accents for anyone, for any purpose, because that plays into who they are, and it stands for a little bit more than just I come from this part or this region of a specific location. No, it like there's belief systems that are kind of tied into it as well.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So that's why like my accent is very how can I say global? I don't know, because I kind of get from a lot of different people that I meet in life a little of their accent. So I lived with an Indian and an Italian for a whole year, and I talked to them every day. So I remember that I the expression "my treat," like, that's my treat. Let's go have lunch. My treat. Let's go. I knew this expression. I know what it is. I've used it already. But during a whole year, I stopped using it because my Italian friend would say my offer instead of my treat. Instead of saying, no, let's go have lunch, it's my treat, he would say, let's go have lunch, it's my offer. My offer. And that, like, I stopped saying my treat, and I started saying my offer so he could understand. And because I understood what he meant, like, I knew that my offer meant my treat. And then when I started studying Italian, I discovered that in Italian, they say io offro, or my treat. So it's an influence from his language. And because he spoke Italian, I spoke Portuguese, I understood what he meant. I've never had a problem understanding what my offer meant, and it was okay. This is an example of English as a lingua franca. Is that an error, a mistake that we would correct in the classroom doesn't really affect anything. There is this translanguaging happening during the intercultural communication, and still communication is effective. Uh,
Okay, but then that leads me. So then I have a question. So you knew, right? Because you would say my treat beforehand, and then he would say my offer because of all the reasons that you just gave, translanguage, blah blah blah. Obviously, there was a lot of accommodation in there on your end because you were
yeah,
trying to make it, communication effective between you and him. But we do have the misconception here that elf is just speaking the way you want. So, what's
mhm,
the difference between you accommodating for him, understanding that there's a bit of a barrier and there's a bit of a like a learning curve for him to be able to go from my offer to my treat, and this saying, well, we can speak the way that we want because as long as communication is happening, then I can say whatever makes
yeah.
sense.
And this is a misconception that even Jennifer Jenkins wrote about. And that was something that people in like research, academics, uh, in linguistics, they believe it because of examples I just gave you. Because it sounds like that doesn't make much sense. Like he spoke the way he wanted, and we always talk about like, ah, you shouldn't be accents are your identity. You shouldn't change your accent, etc., etc. So we have this accommodation and inclusion within the English as a lingua franca research, but also that doesn't mean you can speak anything like everything goes, and that's
And
why
where's the line? So
they,
yeah, that's the probably the sticking point is like, okay, so we understand accommodation inclusion,
but
but you
there
can't
is,
just it's not the Wild West. So
yeah, no,
so then how do we define?
it's just that what we always talk about in English as a lingua franca is that standard English that equals native English in attitude, like usually people connect standard with native. uh, it's just this concept that is very vague and that doesn't really exist because people don't speak a standard English. Everybody speak an English that is influenced by something. So you grew up in, you just said, I forgot where you grew up.
Northeast, the like
In the Northeast.
Massachusetts, yeah. Hmm.
So that influenced the way you speak.
Oh,
Uh,
big time.
yeah. So I lived in the US, in England, and I've had Brazilian teachers my whole life. That influences the way I speak. And we don't speak a standard English like a British BBC English. This is like conceptions, like concepts that are very, I don't know how to say, like it's very non, they are non-existent. There is no standard English. That's what I mean. People speak different Englishes. That point being made, what we have is uh, English, real use, real examples of English outside the classroom. So outside the classroom, we have users of English, people speaking English the way they can, the way they know. Okay. Sometimes they don't even learn formally how to speak English. They just speak English. And this is something
That's kind of how I picked up Portuguese, like a lot, really. Like I would just listen to my like mother-in-law and listen to my husband saying things, and I would just kind of look at the situation and repeat.
that's real
and,
life.
and that's how some people learn English too,
Yeah.
right? They just kind
So
of like, all right, that seems right.
in real, a lot of servers in restaurants, they know English because they hear it so much in the restaurant that they know it. And then you start learning in real use, like how intelligible you are, not like being conscious about it, but you kind of know how intelligible, and then you kind of negotiate communication. But then we go to the classroom. So let's talk about, is it speaking any way you want when you are learning it? And then No, like we teach English, the standard English. That doesn't exist, but we need like a standard, a parameter, like we need something in a box to teach our students so they can go from this box out. So they get out of the box and go out to use English. When they start using English outside the classroom, then that's not related to us teachers anymore. You see, we have the control of the language that we teach, and we should be teaching grammar, vocabulary. This is important. We teach the language in the classroom, and they use outside. So they are learners inside, and they are users outside. And then we start learning when we are outside the classroom this conscious like effort of intelligibility, how intelligible you are. If you're not intelligible, you're not using English as a lingua franca. This is like you're not using English because people can't understand you. So that is the line. If you can't be understood, or if you're using English in a way that the other person is making too much of an effort to understand what you're saying, this is not English, or this is not English as a lingua franca. So I
It
think,
makes no, it makes yeah. I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it though, because in the classroom, right? So we're teaching to a standard, and I know that there's a lot of people that are up in arms. Up in arms about, well, we have the general American, like phonemic charts, right? So like we'll just even use those. So
mhm,
we have the general American, and then we have the received pronunciation. And typically teachers teach to those in terms of
mhm,
phonology,
mhm.
because we have to standardize it somehow. It's
Yeah.
not it's not that we're placing those on a higher pedestal of something else. It's just that there has to be some sort of standardization. Once
Mhm.
there's standardization, and that in the classroom when we do teach things like you said, grammar, vocabulary, listening skills, all of those types of, we teach all of these things, then the students are prepared enough to go out to be users, and hopefully they've had enough influence in the classroom and enough exposure to what we would consider to be normal or standard. Not that it's better or worse, it's just the only way that we can standardize it. Once they go out into the real world, that and they become users, especially in the scenarios of uh, English as a lingua franca users, they have options,
Yeah,
because they have to accommodate, because using it is much different than learning it,
exactly.
but
Yeah,
they have to have both scenarios.
yeah,
To be able to be a user, you have to learn it, and to learn it you have to be able to use it. So it's kind of like hand in hand, they
yeah.
work
But
in tandem.
yeah, and there's also this the point that that's the most important part here is that we can't only teach grammar, vocabulary, and the standard English, whatever that we have to, but not only that, because some we kind of have to prepare students for this second part of going outside and speaking, because they are going to be very confused and insecure and desperate when they go out to speak English if they don't have like something on how it is to speak English in an English as a lingua franca context or intercultural communication. What does that mean? That now bringing English as a lingua franca to the classroom, we are when we are saying that we should include English as a lingua franca in the classroom, it doesn't mean that you have to change everything you do, like just get everything and throw in the trash. That's not it.
It's just it's especially tempting to do at the beginning of the year, like I'm going to completely do everything new.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
no, now,
no, new year, new me.
yeah, that's not it. Like you
No.
should like schools equals like schools equal standardization in every subject. So we teach for exams, we teach students to speak English from a standard language variation. That's okay. We have to keep doing that. It's important. The students need to find an easy way to learn. We need to find ways to teach these difficult grammar points and vocabulary and whatever they have to learn. It's our job as teachers to teach that. But it's important to also include some sort of elf awareness. So that's why we don't teach elf, because elf is not a language, it's on itself. It's not like a thing you can teach. It's just this perspective, or as I say, like this lenses you wear on how you see English. So if you are aware that when your students go outside, they won't they won't remember the rules of the present simple for third person. Like if you are aware of that, you can include things to prepare them for that. So, or when they go outside, the likelihood of meeting non native English speakers, such as, I don't know, Italians, French, Nigerians, whatever, not Nigerians are natives. I don't know, like any other
And you
people
pick a
that
country,
don't
yeah.
speak English
Yeah.
as a native language,
Uh-huh.
you kind of have to prepare them, like at least expose them to these different variations. It's so English as a lingua franca for the classroom means that we are including these things.
Can you
Yeah.
give me like a practical example? Like I have some ideas in my head, but please,
Yeah.
practical example of like what does that look like in terms of activity, like small examples?
hmm there are a lot of cultural activities in course books now, for example. So, for example, there is a cultural activity somewhere about China, the Chinese New Year, for example. And usually in course books, they have a native speaker pretending to be Chinese. So just changing this audio to a real Chinese explaining what the Chinese New Year is in English, you are including an English as a lingua franca context in your classroom because you're getting something that
Got
is
it.
someone pretending to be
Hmm.
to a real example of English as a lingua franca.
So this would lend itself to trying to, or to the best of our abilities, to incorporate more um, intercultural and variations of authentic materials.
Yeah.
Because then obviously that would include people try, for example, it doesn't necessarily have to be always audio. We always seem to go with like listening and speaking, which I
Mhm.
understand is like one of the biggest things. But for example, and you can probably find them on the internet, examples of emails or text messages sent back and forth
Yeah.
between people with different L1s would hugely impact their way of communicating to each other.
Yeah.
Or go onto the internet and look for, like on Instagram, a post that has thousands and thousands of comments from people all over the world, and then you can take a look and see how everybody's kind of representing themselves
Yeah.
and commenting on whatever
Yeah.
the post might be about.
Yeah. Actually, reading and writing are the most difficult skills to include an elf awareness or elf perspective, because that those areas, those skills are the ones that teachers usually are more strict about because they are writing, they are in paper.
Because they always tend to go towards the academic versions of it, right?
Yeah, so it's where
Mhm.
standard English plays a bigger role than just exposing them to different varieties. So an example is like when you are grading writing, um, like many, I think the majority of teachers correct all grammar mistakes or point at least point it out. But in an English as a lingua franca context, like sending emails back and forth, you will find mistakes, that communication will still be effective. And then what would be a better approach to correcting or grading writing, considering this context of English as a lingua franca? I'm asking that because I don't have an answer. Because I correct grammar and vocabulary when I'm grading writing, when I'm correcting papers, emails, whatever. So people don't really have an answer for that yet. Like assessment is a, well, not that it's not being studied in English as a lingua franca, but it's a gap. In English as a lingua franca, assessment is a big gap because there are things we can't really find an answer. For example, grading papers. How do you grade papers in an English as a lingua franca context?
Well, we have seen, I mean, I'm not the expert at all in this scenario, but we have seen it kind of trying to be incorporated when they say like communicative purpose, for example. So they'll have rubrics, and the rubrics have several different categories. So you can certainly, correct the grammar and analyze the appropriateness of the lexical items that the student is using. But then sometimes there is a category of assessment or evaluation that says, are you achieving the communicative purpose? Are you considering the audience? Are you considering this? And it kind of lends itself, but it's never the only criteria. It's included, and typically, it's very subjective at the same point, because depending on, for example, if you have a piece of writing from a student, the way that you might interpret it is going to be different than how I might interpret it, because it really depends on who the audience is in the lingua franca context, right? Because someone has, like,
that's it. It's just like we're going to go back and forth in that.
This circular argument. Well, okay, we need to include it, but how do we include it? How do we assess it? And if we can't just say, well, your audience is da 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 da. Like, I mean, we could stipulate that and base it. It would be more difficult though, because if the students don't have any sort of, it's like, really, how would you say this is your audience? Like, I don't know what that would look like.
It's really difficult. Like, I'm still thinking about it, because as a teacher, because I still teach, I always try to incorporate more of English as in lingua franca in my teaching. And this is my challenge, like incorporate awareness in writing. So this, I'm a specialist in English as a lingua franca, and I'm working in that. So I'm trying to find a way to incorporate, but it's really difficult because, you can create the perfect rubrics that you don't include finding errors, but when you don't point out errors, or you don't point out like grammar mistakes or whatever, the writing is not really intelligible. Like, it gets really difficult to read. And then, like, for example, not using the correct tense when you write. Although, like, I can still understand it because I'm a teacher, but then when I, for example, give to another student to read, sometimes the student doesn't understand. Or if I give to another teacher to read it, the other teacher might. So,
or if you give it to somebody outside, like give it to your husband, for example, who's not in English language teaching.
It's really hard. But then
because then it's
that we just we go in circles.
Yeah,
it's really difficult. But I'm trying. I'll find an answer someday. Let's see.
Life mission. How to incorporate. Because it is very, like, we had and have been talking about, it's context and situational dependent, and it very much, not only the context and the situation, but then it also depends on who they're talking to.
Yeah.
And exactly. So
No,
It's
that's exactly it. And that's why we always talk about like being elf aware. If you in elf awareness, we can talk about elf aware materials, but it's on the person, like on the teacher. If the teacher is elf aware, he will try to find ways to include more of the real world, not like real English, like the real world, how communication happens in the classroom. So, how we see communication and how communication happens is really connected to English as a lingua franca, because sometimes we are so focused in teaching the language that we forget that the language is for communication. So, teaching communication strategies, for example, is a way to include alpha awareness in your teaching, like teaching your students to I don't know, paraphrase, or teach your students to
like
say,
more I think they're categorized as like sub skills of speaking, right? Like
yeah,
I mean, they're communication skills, but if you look at some
yeah.
of the sub skills of speaking and circumlocution and things like that, then
It's in
those
the
are,
CFR actually, like
yeah,
it's
it's
there. So, but some teachers get really, really like, I mean, I'm from regular schools, K-12. So I see like teachers teaching past simple every day and making students uh, learn the irregular verbs by heart. And what is the point of that? Like, it's important, you have to do that, but not only that. That's the thing. Not only that, like, knowing irregular verbs is really important, but for what? Like, what's the next step? So sometimes teachers, some teachers, and not the majority, it's just like I know a lot of teachers, they have been changing their and reflecting on the practice, because English as a lingua franca has become a hot topic. But I still don't understand like some practices, such as making students write a lot of sentences that are disconnected from their realities, from like just making them copy words and knowing things by heart. Very outdated. Like nobody does that anymore.
well, yeah, no, I get it. I also get it. I think that there's sometimes it's a teacher's perspective of what learning is,
Yeah, because that's
because
how they learned as
that's how
well.
they learned, yeah, and so
Yeah.
then they assume that this is how I learned, so now this is how you're going to learn, which I would encourage those teachers to then kind of broaden their perspective of the teaching and learning scenario. But then also, I think that there's comfort in concrete. So
Yeah.
if there is a right and a wrong, it's easier to grade that test. It's easier to correct those types of activities because those are concrete. When it becomes, and we can fault teachers if we want to, but at the same time, you work in K through 12, and I have friends and colleagues that work in regular schools and things along those lines. Thankfully, I'm not in that scenario right now because I think it would be very overwhelming. But I have, for example, a peer that has over 500 students this semester.
Mhm.
500, because he works in a huge, huge school and he has multiple classes and he has 500 students. And so the practicality of being able to monitor, for example, an elf based or elf awareness type of activity where we really focused on communication and giving feedback to the student, meaningful feedback to the student,
Mhm.
that is relatively unrealistic for someone who is teaching 500 students in a
Mhm.
semester.
But I mean, we
I
have
mean,
no, no. I
you
understand.
know what I mean? So it's like,
Yes, because I used to be a public school teacher with like 1,000
no, yeah, it's
students.
like lovely to
I
talk
felt
about, but then the reality of some public school teachers is just like,
yeah.
how?
But the
How?
thing is, there are levels to English as a lingua franca and to alpha awareness. There are levels, and that was my research actually. Like how public school teachers saw ALF, like like how they saw it, because it's in BNCC, which is like it's one of the main points of BNCC. So all teachers should at least like know a little about it, because it's there stated that they should teach English from an English as a lingua franca perspective, which I don't really agree it should be stated like that. Like, well, they have to know about it before you say that they have to do it. But anyway, it's there. It's in public policy, and when I started studying it from the public school perspective, like with teachers with these scenarios that you mentioned, what I've learned is that teachers they need some exposure to what it is first, and that's my life mission. That's why I do a lot of what I do. For example, on Monday I was at USP giving a free lecture,
I saw
and that,
that. How'd it
yeah,
go?
I really like doing that, to
Mm,
raise awareness on something that teachers are demanded to know somehow.
but
Like
not
it,
supported.
yeah,
Like it's
you know,
like it's like you have to know this, but then there's really not a lot of
yeah, you're not
support to
supported. Yeah,
like
you don't have any support or training or anything. It's just there. It's in the policy, so you should be doing that. Um, and then when I did my research, that is called Embracing and Resisting English as a Lingua Franca. Teachers didn't know what it was. They were exposed to the definition. They kind of learned more about it, and afterwards, I wanted to understand how much of it could be used by them in the classroom. I've learned that there are levels. Like you can start with something very small to make you comfortable with the concept itself. So, for example, and also to make you a better teacher and like with yourself and make you better with yourself as a teacher. What I mean by that is that in my research, I've learned that some teachers, when they learned about English as a lingua franca, they became more comfortable with their own English, because they are not comfortable because it doesn't sound like whatever, and they felt judged by other teachers when they spoke English. So they've learned about the concept of English as a lingua franca, they became more comfortable with it. So this is a first step, like when it has an influence on you as a teacher. And then we have other steps when you put it into teaching. As I mentioned, when you have to play an audio of someone, like it's there, it's in the book, you have to put a CD in the radio and play it. When you play it, if you mention that this is not a real Chinese person speaking, it's a native speaker pretending to be a Chinese. So how do you think a Chinese sounds like for real? Do you know? So raising this question and making this discussion happen, it's a level of self-awareness. So you have levels. You don't have to like bring non-native speakers from around the world to the, like you could do that too, but you can start very small. And starting this small also changes the attitudes and identities of your own students, especially in regular schools. So that's the thing. Like I would never tell teachers to like do that, like plan something wonderful with different videos, because sometimes they don't even have a projector to play the video in the classroom, right? So, but that's,
incremental. You can do incremental steps, and then as you, if you have the resources, if you have the materials, you can kind of build upon it, and
yeah.
it grows and grows, and at least the seed has been planted.
Yes,
Um,
that's exactly the when my professor in Southampton read my thesis, my dissertation, she mentioned that, oh, like because I didn't find much change in teachers' perceptions, and I was disappointed, like, oh, they didn't change much, it was just a little. And she said, but well, at least it's a seed. And that's it. Like you start with the seed and let's see what happens after that. And when I wrote my book, the book, what I had in my head was that public school teachers in Brazil should understand it. So I won't use any jargon, and I'll make it with B2 level of English so they can understand it. I'll have like reflection boxes. I'll have blah, blah, blah. Like I had like all these ideas, and of course, FTD was so nice and helped me with that. But it's a book to make the research and then academia and all these complex ideas very simple, so like they can put
It's
something
less
into practice.
intimidating.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's not like, I can't even jump into that. I'm not able to
because
really
what you
comprehend.
mentioned about like 500 students, teachers, they will like resist it if it's too complicated, because we want concrete as teachers. We want concrete. And when we get everything a teacher knows and say, this is wrong, you're doing everything wrong, just change everything, now include this, include that. That's not the point of alpha awareness. It's just like giving these small steps and helping teachers like give these small steps and changing themselves and changing students, considering a reality that English is used as a lingua franca in the world today. That's it. It's too
Thank
much.
you.
I think it's too much.
No, it's wonderful. I just want to thank you because I feel like a lot of things may be misconceptions, and just kind of like talking about it, breaking it down a little bit, makes it a little bit more digestible for people. So I thank you, because I think whenever they see it, there is a lot of resistance and all of that good stuff. So thank you for talking about, at least I think we got through all three of them. All three of the misconceptions we got through, and we had lots of fun anecdotes. But if people want to, because I think people might be interested in the book, or they might want to reach out to you. So of course, social media is probably the best way, and I'll include everything. What's the name of the book though, so we can include it here?
The name of the book is English as a Lingua Franca. That's it. English as a
Easy,
Lingua Franca.
easy peasy to remember.
Yeah, that's it. English as a Lingua Franca. And it's by FTD.
Great,
FTD, and Stanford.
awesome. And
So that, I think that's it. And I have like my LinkedIn page and Instagram page. If people want to learn more about it, I'm more than happy. If you want to reach
amazing.
out, and I don't know, I'm here.
We'll put it all in the show notes so that people can find the links to it and be able to contact you. And
Sure.
I just want to thank you, because it's been wonderful and illuminating.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's been like,
Of course.
yeah, so long. We discussed this podcast so long ago, and it finally happened.
But then we went on vacation. And then it was like, okay, let's get back to it. We have to
Yeah.
start working.
So I'm really happy that it finally happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm available for any other podcasts you want to do again.
Wonderful. Yes, you are always welcome back. Any tips and tricks and new things and if you finally solved that problem of the reading and writing, you're definitely coming back.
I'll get a Nobel if I do, but well, I'll let you know.
Well, you have to come on the podcast first, either before or after you receive the Nobel Prize, okay?
All right. Deal.
Thank you, and we will see everybody soon.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date, and of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.